A warm welcome to all my dear 4th standard children. Today we are going to see the second part from your adaptation in plants. So, in the first part we discussed about the types of plants and what is habitat and what is adaptation, right, and also we saw about the plant that come under grass family, is it? Yes. So, today we are going to see the second part from your adaptation in plants. Come on, let us see. So, today we are going to see, in this session we are going to see about the aquatic plants. So, aquatic plants is the plants that grow in water, is it? So, the second type of plant. So, what are all the aquatic plants? So, the aquatic plants are differentiated into 3 types. So, they are floating plants, fixed plants and underwater plants, right. So, now we are going to see about what is floating plants. So, floating plants, so these plants they float on the water. So, they float freely on the water and they are very light weighted plants, that is why they float freely on the water and the leaves and all will be very light, and thereby we can see here the plants they float on the water. So, that is why they are an example of floating plant. So, what is this plant? So, this plant is duckweed. So, this is the duckweed plant. Okay. So, duckweed. So, duckweed is the example of floating plant. So, next example is water hyacinth. So, this is the water hyacinth. So, the water hyacinth also we can see these plants they float on the water. So, they even the roots of these plants, the parts of the plants completely float on the water. So, the example of this plant is water hyacinth. So, water hyacinth. So, water hyacinth. Water hyacinth is an example of floating plant. So, we saw 2 plants under floating plants. What are they? Duckweed and water hyacinth. Next we are going to see about the fixed plants. So, what is fixed plants? So, fixed plants means the plants they float on the water, but their roots, that is they are fixed into the bed of the pond or a lake. So, by the help of the roots. So, the roots of these plants are fixed into the bed of the pond, the ஏரி or அந்த குளம் சொல்வாங்கல, அந்த குளத்துக்கு அடியில இருக்கிற அந்த மண்ணுல என்ன இருக்குமா அந்த வேர் வந்து ஃபிக்ஸ் ஆயிருக்கும். But the plants will be in the water only, right. So, we can see on the top it will, the leaves of these plants will float and they are, we can see the stem of these plants are very long, thin and it will be hollow. Hollow means கொஞ்சம் போலா இருக்கும், ஓட்டையா இருக்கும், சரியா. Why? Because it is very light weighted and thereby it is inside the water, right. And also we can see the leaves are very broad. So, for this plants the leaves are very broad and they float on the water, and we can see the stomata. What is stomata? Stomata is the tiny pores that help a plant to take in the air, right. So, these stomata usually the stomata is present underside of the leaf for all the plants, but in this plants we can see the stomata on the top of the leaf. So, above the leaf we can see the stomata, thereby the stomata take in the air, right. So, what are the examples of this plant? So, this one is lily, okay. So, water lily. So, lily is an example of fixed plants, and some more example, the next example that we are going to see is lotus. So, lotus also we can see the leaves will be floating and will be very broad, and we can see a waxy texture will be present on the leaves. So, thereby what happens, it prevents the entry of water. So, even on the water also we can see the water will not merge with the leaves, right. So, it will have a waxy structure to prevent from the soggage on the water, right. So, the example of this is also lotus. So, we saw under fixed plants, we saw examples are lily and lotus that come under fixed plants. And the third one that we are going to see is underwater plants. So, these plants they are completely submerged inside the water. So, we cannot see any part of the plants above the water, right. So, completely these plants are grown inside the water, and these roots, the leaves, everything are present inside the water. So, what are the examples of the submerged, that is underwater plants? So, this is tape grass. So, this tape grass is a example of underwater plants. So, the tape grass is also called as Vallisneria. Okay, so this is an example of underwater plants, and the next example is pondweed. So, this is the pondweed. So, what are the two plants that we saw under the examples of underwater plants? Pondweed and also tape grass. Okay, so they are completely they are seen inside the water, right? Okay, so now let us see some more interesting plants. So, what is carnivorous plants? We can say even there are some plants that they are carnivores. Carnivores means they eat the flesh of the the insects as their food. So, the example is insectivorous plants. So, even there are some plants, they take the insects as their food, they take the nutrients from the insects and they live. So, mostly these insectivorous plants, they lack in nitrogen in that soil. So, mostly the insectivorous plants where they grow, no, so there the soil does not contain nitrogen. So, thereby the plants need nitrogen, right. So, that is why they take the nitrogen from the insects, right. So, that is why they are called as insectivorous plants. Now, let us see what are the examples of the insectivorous plants. The first one is Sundew plant. So, you can see this is also called as Drosera. So, you can see the jelly, very sticky substances is present on the top of the plant. Once the insect or any flies come and sit there, so immediately it will be very sticky, and thereby the insect cannot escape from that plant, and thereby the plant will stick the insect and take the nutrients and make the insect die and take the nutrients from the insect. Okay. So, the example is Sundew plant. So, this is their Sundew plant. This is also called as Drosera. Okay. So, next see the second one, Venus flytrap. So, this is known as Venus flytrap. So, you can see it will be like a trap. So, it will be like a trap. So, when mostly these plants will be very colorful, they are attractive, and they are very they will have a good fragrance, thereby it will attract the bees or any insects to come and sit there. So, once it is very colorful and very attractive, the insects will come and sit there. Once it sits inside the trap, so immediately it will shut the leaf. So, actually this is a type of leaf which is modified as a trap. Okay. So, once the insect or any small animals comes inside, it will trap, and thereby after few hours the insect or the animal will die, and the plants will absorb the nutrients from those animals or from those insects. Okay. So, the example of this is Venus flytrap. Venus flytrap is also called as Dionaea. Okay. The name of the plant is Dionaea. Okay. The third one that we are going to see is picture plant. So, the leaf of this plant is modified into a jug-like structure. So, actually you can see this is a jug-like structure. So, this is actually a leaf is modified into a jug-like structure, and it has some liquids into it. So, once the insect or any honeybee comes and sits there, it cannot able to escape from that place because it will be very sticky, and thereby what happens, the insect will die inside it, and the plants will absorb the nutrients from the insect. Okay. So, this is actually look like a picture, right, look like a jug. So, that is why it is known as picture plant, or also it is called as Nepenthes. Okay. So, next we are going to see about non-green plants. So, the non-green plants are also called as saprophytes. Why they are called as saprophytes means, so they cannot able to prepare their own food because there is absence of chlorophyll. Once the plant does not have chlorophyll, they cannot able to prepare the food, right. So, mostly these plants take the nutrients, they will take the food from the dead plants and dead animals that is present in the soil. Okay. So, that is why they are called as saprophytes or non-green plants, they will not be green in color. Example, we can see mushroom. So, kalan. So, mushroom is the example of non-green plants. So, these mushrooms, they cannot prepare their own food, they take the nutrients from the dead plants and dead animals that is present in the soil. Okay. And the next example is Indian pipe. So, even the Indian pipe, it will look like an Indian pipe, it is also called as Monotropa, the botanical name. Okay. So, this plants also cannot able to prepare the food, and it takes the nutrients from the soil which is decomposed by the dead plants and animals. The dead plants and animals, once decomposed, you can see the nutrients present in the soil. From that soil only these plants take the food. Okay, they will not prepare their own food. Okay, so bread mold, even bread mold also example of non-green plants. So they take the food from the bread and they live. Okay, they will not prepare their food. So the example of the non-green plants that we saw is mushroom, Indian pipe and bread mold. Okay, right. So today in this class you learned about the aquatic plants, right. So aquatic plants are divided into 3 types: floating plants, fixed plants and underwater plants. So under floating plants we saw examples of duckweed and water hyacinth, right. And then under the fixed plants we saw examples of lily and lotus. And in the third type of plant that we saw is underwater plants. What are the examples of underwater plants? Yes, so it is tape grass and pondweed, right. So after that we discussed about the insectivorous plants. What are the insectivorous plants that we discussed? Sundew, Venus flytrap and then picture plant, right. So about these we have discussed. So these animals take the food from the insects. Okay. And lastly we discussed about the non-green plants. So examples of non-green plants are bread mold, mushroom and Indian pipe. So they will not prepare their own food because of the lack of chlorophyll. They take the nutrients from the dead plants and animals, right. So hope this class will be useful for you. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.